China threatens the U.S. over the president of Taiwan's visit. An Australian official travels to China because money, and the U.S. Congress actually tries to stop China's forced organ harvesting. That and more in this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. It's been a tough week for Taiwan, not just because of the general threat from China, but also because of the specific threat from China. When it comes to threats, China's not on the spectrum, they are the spectrum. Taiwan's democratically elected president, Tsai Ing-wen, traveled to Central America this week to visit Guatemala and Belize, the last two countries there that still recognize Taiwan. Now, on her way to Central America, she transited through the U.S., landing in New York City on Wednesday. This isn't anything unusual. Taiwan's presidents have a tradition of traveling through the U.S. on their way to another destination. These are considered private, unofficial visits. This is President Tsai's 7th transit through the U.S. And on her way back to Taiwan next week, she has plans to stop over in Los Angeles and meet with the U.S. Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. But, and this will surprise no one, that angers China. China threatened retaliation if the meeting takes place. At this point, I'm pretty sure the Chinese Communist Party would threaten retaliation if Tsai Ing-wen met with any prominent American, including Weird Al, which I would love to see. Despite these threats, the meeting with Speaker McCarthy will probably still take place. President Tsai Ing-wen said, "We are calm and confident, will neither yield nor provoke." Well, obviously, that's provocation enough. The Communist Party spokesperson threatened that China would resolutely fight back. Fight back? What does that mean when you're the one starting the fight? This is like a hunter shooting a deer while it's grazing and saying, "Now we're even." The reason President Tsai is in Central America is to meet with leaders from Taiwan's allies, Guatemala and Belize. That's especially important because this week, the country of Honduras officially cut ties with Taiwan in favor of China. Why? Well, Honduras did not give an official reason, but for context, China has poured billions of dollars into Latin America, including a hydroelectric dam project in central Honduras, built by the Chinese company Sinohydro, with about $300 million in Chinese government financing. For Taiwan, that's a big damn problem. And for Honduras as well, when they see the quality of Chinese infrastructure. They wanted a dam so bad they would have had better luck siding with beavers. Well, that's a damn pro. But there is some good news for Taiwan. Earlier this week, a delegation from the Czech Republic visited Taiwan to deepen trade ties. The Czech Republic officially recognizes the PRC as the one true China, and it has since 1949 when Czechoslovakia was a Soviet satellite state. But the current Czech leadership has been deepening ties with Taiwan and pulling back from China, especially under its new president. The Czech politician who led the delegation in Taiwan this week said there was a public warning from China, but there has not been any other act. Wait. Selfies with officials, presidential meeting, friendship medal, and no consequences from China? This just goes to show that you can get away with a lot more than you think without retaliation from the CCP, especially if the CCP is busy threatening America. Honestly, they're threatening so many people at once, they probably lost track. Who was I supposed to retaliate against this week? America? The Czech Republic? That 11-year-old kid on Xbox Live who called me Winnie? I need to keep a spreadsheet of my enemies. And after the break, how China attempts to influence foreign officials. Welcome back. While some politicians are pulling back from China, others are completely ignoring the writing on the wall. Like Daniel Andrews, Premier of the Australian state of Victoria. He just announced a surprise visit to China. The same China whose leaders are threatening to make a surprise visit to Taiwan, and which put ethnic minorities in concentration camps, and recently started a trade war with Australia for simply asking where COVID really came from. Yes, that China. Sounds like a perfect time to visit. That'd be like someone hearing about Saudi Arabia murdering and dismembering journalist Jamal Khashoggi and thinking, I know where I'm going for vacation this year. But Andrews says that his state needs to deepen trade with China. You see, China is incredibly important. Our two-way trade in 2022, with all those COVID shocks, was still in excess of $40 billion. This is our largest and most significant trading partner. Plus, Victoria has about 42,000 Chinese students who typically pay full tuition at state universities. And you don't want them to go back to China, not because they'd lose their freedoms when they return to China, but because close to $14 billion worth of Victoria's economic activity can be traced back to the international education sector. So really, it's not that Andrews doesn't care about China's human rights abuses or whatever. It's just that he cares more about money. He wants to be sure he can afford his next vacation to Mordor. After hearing the evil Sauron came back, he figured it was the perfect spot to take a holiday. Meanwhile, lawmakers in the U.S. state of Utah are under scrutiny for their travel to China. According to a report from the Associated Press this week, groups of up to 25 Utah lawmakers routinely took trips to China every other year since 2007. Instead of using personal money, they used a mix of campaign donations and money coming from China. And since those trips began, many Utah lawmakers have taken on a rosier view of China, especially after the Chinese Communist Party appealed to their Mormon beliefs and their hopes that one day the Mormon Church could expand in China. Because if anyone wants Mormon churches, it's the officially atheist Chinese Communist Party. It's like believing someone saying they want to have a family when you met them at a vasectomy clinic. And in return, totally a coincidence, Utah lawmakers delayed legislation Beijing didn't like, nixed resolutions that conveyed displeasure with its actions, and expressed support in ways that enhance the Chinese government's image. Sounds like a win-win. Except it's a solid lose for the Mormon Church, which is still illegal in China. But hey, I'm sure if you keep helping them out, they'll eventually keep their word. Thoughts and prayers. Partly in response to the CCP influence activities, one Utah lawmaker has proposed a bill that would require state officials to disclose foreign government gifts. But for some reason, other lawmakers didn't seem to like that bill, and it died in committee. Probably didn't make it to their desks, on account of there not being any room, what with all the foreign gifts on them. In the wake of Xi Jinping's visit to Russia last week, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has invited Xi to visit Ukraine. Xi Jinping's response was silence. So he doesn't follow up on threats or invitations. He just leaves everyone on red, no matter what. Man, this guy really is evil. When reporters asked about it at a recent Foreign Ministry press conference in Beijing, spokeswoman Mao Ning said she had no information to give, but that Beijing maintains communication with all parties concerned. Sure they are. And after the break, the U.S. Congress is ready to call out the Chinese Communist Party for its lies. Some of them. Welcome back. Remember this idiot who defrauded FTX investors out of $8 billion? Well, in addition to the dozen or so charges Sam Bankman-Fried faces, he's now also being indicted for paying a $40 million bribe to China. In 2021, Chinese law enforcement had frozen about $1 billion in cryptocurrency assets belonging to one of Bankman-Fried's companies. And after many failed attempts to convince Chinese officials to unfreeze the money, he eventually just straight up bribed them, allegedly. The U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act prohibits Americans from bribing foreign government officials, so Bankman-Fried could get an additional 5 years in prison. Add that to the potential 155 years in jail he's already facing, and he won't care at all. Just so long as they keep feeding him vegan food for the next century and a half. We want to make the guy who bribed China and committed $8 billion in fraud eat the same food as everyone else. That would be unethical. The U.S. House of Representatives has overwhelmingly passed a bill that would punish Chinese officials involved in forced organ harvesting. Starting in the 90s, the Chinese Communist Party has killed people for their organs. It started off slow, but as the technology improved, researchers estimate the number of forced organ transplants in China is at least 60,000 to 100,000 a year, which means there are at least hundreds of thousands, if not over 1 million people who have been killed for their organs in China. For a while, the victims were mainly practitioners of Falun Gong, a spiritual practice that the CCP was trying to destroy. But then the CCP realized, why torture people in prison when you can just kill them, sell their organs, and make a huge profit? Yeah, sounds like the perfect place to bring your religion. Good luck, Mormons. Eventually, the CCP moved on to the Muslim Uyghurs for organs too, since they're in prison camps now as well. Local Chinese officials even created special organ transplant lanes at the Urumqi International Airport. Considering what I had to go through to get TSA pre-checked, I'd hate to see what their screening process is like. But finally, the U.S. Congress has taken meaningful action on Chinese organ harvesting. All it took was over 2 decades of lobbying by their constituents. The U.S. House passed the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act of 2023, overwhelmingly, with a vote of 413 to 2. There's a similar bipartisan bill being reviewed in the U.S. Senate, co-sponsored by both Republicans and Democrats. The way the bill works is the president would be required to provide Congress with a list of suspects who have participated in forced organ harvesting or human trafficking with the intent of organ harvesting. For each suspect on the list, the president must impose property and visa blocking sanctions. If this bill becomes law, it would be the first law that would actually punish specific Chinese officials for their involvement in forced organ harvesting. Now, I applaud Congress for this. Voting for that bill really takes guts. Speaking of Congress actually doing something good, this week they also passed a bill to remove China's developing country label. For decades, China has labeled itself a developing country, giving itself special benefits in the WTO, the Paris Climate Accords, the World Bank, and many more. That's despite China having the world's second largest economy. It's like saying Shaquille O'Neal should be allowed to play on high school teams because he's still a developing teenager. So now Congress wants to stop China from cheating. But even with the law, though, the U.S. wouldn't quite have the power to just unilaterally change China's status from developing country to developed. But if the bill becomes law, it would direct the U.S. Secretary of State to pursue altering China's status in international organizations, and it would propose a mechanism to do that. From now on, the only thing China will be developing is anger towards America. Guess America is back on China's spectrum. Luckily, they're not great at following up on those threats. And now it's time for me to answer a question from a viewer who directly supports China Uncensored. The best way you can help keep this show going is by contributing to us through Patreon or Locals. Your contributions really add up, and they allow us to keep the lights on here. And, as a perk, you can ask me questions I'll answer on the show. Today's question comes from Curry on Patreon. I'd love to visit China someday, but is there a way to reconcile my love for Chinese language and ancient culture with my hatred and fear of the CCP? Yes, there is. Visit Taiwan instead. Taiwan is the China all of China could be, if it wasn't run by these guys. But, given the CCP's plans, you might want to visit Taiwan soon. Thanks for your question, Curry. And thank you to everyone else who supports China Uncensored by contributing through the crowdfunding website Patreon, by pledging $1 or more per episode, or by supporting us through Locals. I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.